So continuing with Do Muslim Women Need Saving by Abu-Lughod, she presents, after critiquing the way that the West, particularly Laura Bush and other imperialist women, look into the issue of veiling, she presents us with that genealogy of the burqa. And the first thing she says pretty much is the Taliban did not invent it. This is a way of dressing of women's attire that precedes by centuries the Taliban. In her view, it symbolizes a separation between the public and the private, between the world of men, the public, and the world of women, the private. She understands it as something, a little bit of a portable seclusion, like a mobile home, where women can use this and then sort of like still be at home because they are not fully visible by other people outside of the domestic. So she looks at the burqa and veiling as something that women might even choose to do as a way of protecting themselves from the public world of men. And she tells us that we should think carefully about this because we also, those of us who think of ourselves as women, we also have appropriate attire. I don't teach class in the same way that I dress when I go to the beach. I think about the way that I present myself to you when we see each other face to face, and I try to convey some kind of message through my clothing that honors my own way of presenting myself to the world, but also in a way honors you and the experience that you are doing when you are taking classes with me. So I dress appropriately. Until recently, at least, Catholic women would cover their hair when they went to church. Many people still use, certain kinds of clothing according to the occasion that they are going to participate in. So the fact that women dress in a special way, Muslim women dress in a special way when they go out in public is not something that is only characteristic of these women. It's also something that Western women do, only that we do not cover all of ourselves. So she says, let's be careful here and not confuse veiling with lack of agency. We shouldn't assume that it's always imposed on women, and we shouldn't assume that Muslim women, more importantly, right, we shouldn't assume that Muslim women do not have agency and are forced, and we only see them wearing this attire because they are forced to do so. So she says there are two items to keep in mind here. One is that freedom needs to be culturally situated. And if we think of that, the burqa and the veil, when not imposed by the state, as was the case with the Taliban, right? We all know that the Taliban imposes on women. But if it's not imposed, then we can see it as a way of agency, because it's a way of women to express modesty in public. So we can also think that we cannot reduce the diverse situations and attitudes of millions of Muslim women to a single item of clothing. We are looking at women who are veiled, and because they are veiled, we assume that they have no agency or little agency, and that they are submissive to patriarchy. These are all assumptions that Abu-Lughod is trying to make us think through. So she says, well, in a way, we have been saying that we don't want to interfere because we have already interfered with these people in the past, so we don't want to continue trying to tell women what to do. That would be the cultural relativist issue. We would say, well, every culture has its own way of thinking about their own processes, and we shouldn't impose this on them. By the way, we've imposed a lot of things already, so as Westerners, so we shouldn't continue with this practice. And Abu-Lughod says, well, this might be a little disingenuous by Westerners, because the very fact that Westerners have so deeply impacted these cultures means that perhaps some of what we see as natural in that culture is the response to colonialism. It's a response to imperial practices that were deployed on this part of the world. So we shouldn't assume that when we see situations created like the ones that the Taliban created when they force all these women to be veiled, that this is not also part of a response to colonialism, because it is. So she's saying, well, it's kind of late for us to not want to interfere. We've interfered a lot already, and much of what we see is the result of imperialism. So she says, if this is the situation, if what we have here is the result of imperialism, or even of our lack of trying to really help here, what do we do? How do we go around this? Do we sign petitions against the Taliban or not? Do we join organizations that are Western-based, like Global Exchange, and go on tour these countries and find out for ourselves what these people are doing, at the same time that we are joining a delegation of Westerners that not necessarily have the best interests of this area of the world in mind? We need to be mindful of that. So if we decide that signing petitions against the Taliban or joining this Westerner tour exchanges where we do tourism in global South country and pretend that we care and that we are doing something positive for women in this area. So if we don't do that because we don't quite believe that this is the way out, can we then support organizations as RAWA that fight for women's rights under the Taliban? And she says, well, this would be different, because RAWA is an organization that is locally based, that wants to liberate women who do not want to wear the burqa, because obviously there are women who do not want to do that, but also want to protect women who do want to wear the burqa from imperialist feminism, if we want to call it that way, or B-52 bomber feminism, that, like somebody called it on that media article. So this would be different if we decide to support local organizations that support women's liberation within the context of what Muslim women would really want to do, then that would be different, because this organization, RAWA, is also against the war, and it's very clearly denouncing imperialism in the way of the war against Afghanistan and other parts of the Arab world. So she says, perhaps we should only work with those that, along women's rights, request an end to the war that is killing some of the same women. Organizations that are not Global Exchange, that are not based in the West, but are locally based, are against the war and are for women's rights. Only that women's rights understood contextually in their own cultural processes. So she asks us, we should think, what does it mean to save? When we say we are going to save Muslim women by signing petitions against the Taliban, or by joining this Westerner organizations that travel to save these people by sort of parading women's Westerner rights, no? We are saying, well, we are saving you from the Taliban, we are saving you from patriarchy, but we are also saying we are saving you to something. And this to something, when it comes from this imperialistic ways, it's just to the West. We are saving you to the West, so that the West can rely on the fact that we've been so good to you, we've done so much for you, that we are not only bombing you and taking all your oil away from you, we are also saving you, poor women that have been oppressed by patriarchy. So what we are saying is we Western women are better than you, and we can save you because we already saved ourselves. We were able to save ourselves, but you are not because you lack in agency. Look at you, poor thing, how you're walking with the burqa on your head. So we are saying we are better. And this is something that is problematic quite clearly when you're trying to help women somewhere else in the world. So her conclusion is that we want alliances, coalitions, and solidarity, but not to save anyone. We shouldn't be in the position, we shouldn't place ourselves in the position that Rudyard Kipling placed himself in regards to the non-Western world when he was part of the colonial British effort. As you all know, he came up with this notion that it was a white man's burden to save non-Western people because his poor people were unable to stop fighting amongst themselves, to stop terrorizing their own women, were unable to use technology and exploit nature in the way that the West did. So it was up to the white man to carry the burden of improving the life of these non-Western people. And this is an ideology that sold very well in back in the hometowns, right? Back in the capitals of the empire. So what Abu-Lughod is telling us here is that we don't want to go around the world saying that we want to be that this is a white woman's burden to save these non-Western women from their own lack of agency and from the brutality of the patriarchy that they've been placed under. She's asking us to reconsider where Muslim women are exerting agency sometimes by veiling themselves, or if they are indeed just completely agency-less. So I think I've skipped around a little bit, but I hope that it still makes sense. So she says we need to accept the difference. For example, if Muslim women, or Afghan women in particularly, are saved, might they still want to use a burqa? If we convince them that what they are living through is patriarchy and they feel at some point that they liberate themselves or they liberate themselves from patriarchy, could they still use a burqa, and would we respect this? So Abu-Lughod wants us to escape this binary because she thinks that in Afghanistan women are asking for increasing rights, but they do not define themselves in the same way as we define. They do not understand feminism, Western feminism, for themselves as we would want them to accept it. Many women in the Arab world believe that our way of being in the world, a white feminist way of being in the world, is actually something that makes us vulnerable to sexual violence and that shows little morality in society and is disrespectful of God. Can we live with that? That's her question. Can we live with the fact that these women might become in power and still want to wear the burqa and still not think that we are better off than they are? So this is one of the reasons she asked us to examine the implications of these cultural processes in the West, and she ends up talking about the fact that we need to establish alliances with non-Western women, coalitions, and show solidarity, but we shouldn't think that we got it all solved and that we can go around the world saving other women even from themselves and their own ideas of how to show modesty when they are out in public. So you might have seen it in Moodle, but there's this old meme that says there's a woman in a burqa, and then you see a Western woman with a bikini and big sunglasses, and the woman in the bikini looks at the woman in the burqa and she says, poor woman, she's forced to walk around all of her life covering everything except her eyes. And the woman in the burqa looks at the Western woman and says, poor woman, she's forced to walk through life with nothing covered except for her eyes.